Welcome back, Rachel. We're always pleased to see you as part of our regular updates and news sharing and inspiration from the Communion Office and the Alliance, and in particular, in this case, the Communion Forest. But an opportunity for you, Rachel, just to do your presentation and answer whatever questions. I know lots of conversations are happening around our diocese and the Communion Forest, and would love to hear what's happening elsewhere.
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Bishop Andrew, and it's lovely to see everyone again. I think nearly everybody has met me before, but Bishop Andrew, do you want me to? Hello, also lovely to see two of you on the screen there. That's great.
That's Mary, the other one.
Hello, Mary. Would you like me to jump in and introduce myself, Bishop Andrew? And
yes, please.
Okay, perfect. Well, I love this. I think we last met a year ago, but I've also seen some of you at the Campus Rose meetings, and look forward very much to those who are joining next week in London. It'll be terrific to see you. I'm also incredibly grateful on behalf of the Anglican Alliance that you have been such faithful friends, praying for us, encouraging us, supporting us over these last few years. It means a huge amount to us. I can't tell you how much, and especially this new initiative, the Communion Forest, because I think you caught the spirit, caught the vision, and have been supporting us for these last 2 years, which has been fabulous as we get the forest off the ground. I'd love just to hear anything from your side before I start sort of feeding back from my side. Anything you've heard about the forest or any discussions that are going on, do just share those, and then I will share from our side what's going on around the communion. But anyone got anything they'd like to kind of just mention? Yeah, Mark.
I heard about Communion Forest at Lambeth when I was there with my wife. When Andrew and Mary would have heard about it as well. Was there for the planting of the tree, and have followed up fairly closely, and am confused about to what extent it is physical trees and to what extent that's a metaphor. And I've been trying to pass on the word about Zero Emission Churches project that we've done here, or are doing in Canada, where we're changing furnaces, and am surprised that there doesn't seem to be any pickup or interest in that. From your side. And so maybe I need to understand better how this is functioning.
Okay.
That's where I begin.
Fantastic. It'd be great to hear that. And I think it's both and. So let's pick that up. And if my colleagues haven't got back in touch with you on that particular one, just I'll make a note, make sure that we do.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else heard anything or exploring the idea at all?
I know in the Diocese of Niagara, Michael Olton was really championing the idea of the Communion Forest, and encouraging parishes to find ways to be supportive of it. And in some cases, as you say, Mark, it's literally about trees. And it's also about transforming church properties. But also encouraging parishioners to do the same. I know some of our bishops in the house, the Canadian House, hand out saplings at confirmations to all newly confirmed, as also a part of the invitation to be agents of recreation, and that often gets hinged with the Communion Forest.
Wonderful. I love that expression, agents of recreation. That's beautiful. Lovely. Yeah, please go ahead, John.
Hi, so John Stevens. I'm from the Diocese of New Westminster, which is out in Vancouver. So just sort of echo a little bit of what Bishop Andrew was just saying. So there are a number of occasions where trees are offered to either baptismal candidates, so essentially their families, or confirmation candidates. So that's really exciting. Just on the flip side, though, I think kind of linking a little bit with Mark is the sense forest fire is a huge concern here. And I guess it's sort of the concerns around carbon capture and related to that. So while reforestation obviously is really important, but there's also some concerns related to it. Anyway, I'd love some comment around that if you want. And I, you know, can get maybe a little off base, and I'm not trying to do that, but it's just that whole sense of it. It's a huge concern for us is around forest fires, which are really destroying a lot of properties as well as obviously forest itself. So yeah, thank you. Thanks, Rachel. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I will, we've actually just started now an initiative, which is one of the things I'll be sharing with you on the carbon capture side of things. So in a sense, what we're doing is co-creating this forest concept out of that original vision from the Lambeth Conference. So let's make this a very kind of, a creative space as well to share what it is that your context, your churches, your communities are asking for. And the communion forest, it has a sort of a core identity, but then we're sort of finding some related topics that gather very happily under the umbrella, as it were, of that. So thank you for that. Anything else people want to just to add before I jump in? Okay.
I think it's also really timely given the Pope's the release of the Pope's statement on the environment and the challenge to the churches, and where this initiative, the Communion Forest, might dovetail with other ecumenical groups.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I agree. With the second, as it were, so Laudato Si coming out from the Pope, this is a really key moment ecumenically as well. Wonderful. Well, what I would love to do is share my screen, which is ready to go. But please do jump in if there's anything you'd like to discuss on the way. Don't sort of wait till the end. Bishop Andrew, how long would I have for presenting?
I think we usually take a whole hour to 1 o'clock our time, and so we can end early, but we try not to end late.
Indeed. Okay, well, I probably got about 20-25 minutes worth of material, but would love any comments and discussions to come in as we go along. But as you have kind of already indicated, I think that the bishops and spouses took home the vision from that bakingly hot day at the Lambeth Conference, where we had this lovely vision of the whole lawn being covered with a sea of sort of, purple and gorgeous colour, but it was so hot and the grass was baked brown. And in some ways, we couldn't have had a stronger message about climate change. I mean, it wasn't a green and pleasant land at all. But the little oak sapling was planted, and we have just been utterly kind of astonished and thrilled by the uptake around the communion over this last year, with a very simple idea about what is it that we can do to make, I love that term, agents of recreation, but how can we as Anglicans, as Christians, be part of restoring and protecting God's wonderful creation? But it gets more technical, more interesting, more in depth as we move forward. So let me begin, but what I'd like to say is that Compass Rose are a very significant supporter of this. We run it, as all our Anglican Alliance activities, on a very tight shoestring budget, and what you've put in has enabled an extraordinary amount of work to happen. So let me just pop in here, and I won't be able to see you necessarily, so don't put up a hand, just shout if you jump in if you want to chat. But this was me in the Philippines back in March this year, and they are doing an extraordinary amount of both protecting forest and reforestation. This was us actually at the cathedral in Manila, planting what was known as the Anglican Alliance Communion Forest tree, which is actually a grafted tree because they wanted to represent partnership. So they got a tree that's grafted together. But here, some of you may know the Philippines. There's two significant churches, the Episcopal Church there, but also what's known as the Independent Filipino Church, the IFI. And this is the the bishop, the prime bishop here of that. So it's already an ecumenical endeavour. This is us around the communion. So we have these facilitators in different parts of the world who are fabulous. And our strength is really being so decentralized. It's amazing. And having this board of trustees drawn from across the communion, including one from the Church of Canada, and then regional forums that cluster around it for all the work that we do. And like yourselves, I'm sure, we're absolutely grounded in the marks of mission. And what we find fascinating is how they all speak to one another, that all that we do is about the good news, but it's also about nurturing discipleship, the whole life discipleship. So that while the Anglican Alliance would typically be seen as responding to 3, 4, and 5, we actually believe that all of them are integral to each other. But of course, the Communion Forest particularly speaks to the last one, about striving to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. And this is what Archbishop Justin said, that we're about reflecting the gospel priority of a bias for the poor. And as you all know, and as I hear from other friends in Canada, of course, even where you're dealing with issues of forest fire, it's the most vulnerable communities, sometimes the First Nation communities, who are the ones who are most impacted. And so whether it's the impact of climate change or whether it's conflict, poverty as a whole, we're aware of the vulnerabilities. I won't dwell on this too long, but I just wanted to give you this as the overarching focus and framework for the Alliance. So at the heart, it's about a kingdom vision on earth as in heaven, about integral mission, all those marks of mission together, and about people and planet flourishing together. And then this middle one is sort of how we work, absolutely rooted in theology and prayer, asset-based transformation, looking at what are the gifts and skills in communities that can be part of the transformation, working in partnership, whether that's ecumenically or broader, looking at where we have the opportunities for advocacy and influencing, and all about sharing learning, thinking that the kind of the answers are there, whether within the communion or beyond the communion. So let's share them together. And then finally, just on the outside, if we start down here, we've got people on the move. So we deal with issues of human trafficking, migration, so on, resilience and disaster response, tackling inequalities. That's about young people, about women, about Indigenous communities, and so on. About building thriving communities, what that means for people to live well in life in all its fullness. And then also about safeguarding creation. And that's what I want to just particularly focus on in today, is that element of safeguarding creation where the Communion Forest sits. But can I just pause for a moment in case there are any questions or comments about the overall sort of framing of the Alliance?
You just said Alliance. So you really are introducing the Alliance more than the Communion Forest project right now.
Sure. I'm just about to pivot. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a kind of context of where we're coming from. So the Anglican Alliance was asked by the Standing Committee of the ACC to incubate the Communion Forest. So I'm just kind of giving you that overview of where it all sits together.
Thank you.
And of course, many of these issues we work with PWRDF, particularly around the resilience, disaster response, and the inequalities issues. We've got some work that really inspires us with them on Indigenous theologies and so on. But let's continue then pivoting into this area. Just to give you a couple of examples of other work. So we're looking at advocacy on climate and biodiversity. And this is the climate COPs. This was the one in Glasgow in the middle of the pandemic, with Archbishop Julio Murray, who some of you may have come across from Panama, who's the communion lead on this. But what we also love is young people. We've got here Archbishop Julio. This was last year then when the COP moved to Egypt, but also Archbishop Sami, who's the primate of Alexandria, and then a cluster of young people, because we're really keen to get young people involved into this work as well. And this, for example, this is a young woman from Pakistan, absolutely wonderful spokesperson who had dealt with the floods in Pakistan and could speak out on that. And then some of you, as you said, were at the Lambeth Conference. So there was the call on the environment and sustainable development, and a vision statement with that. And we're now working to support phase 3, which is the kind of the landing, I guess, of the calls and hearing the response from around the communion. And then the legacy initiative, which is the communion forest. And some of you may have joined the call webinar last week. It's still available online, and that's a lovely one to hear Archbishop Julio, but also some of the young people and theologians, including Amari, a theologian from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also one of the Communion Forest facilitators, speaking about what's happened in the last year. So here we are with the Communion Forest, and this is the work that you as the Canadian Campus Rose Society have been supporting. And I love that logo. It was developed specially for us, and it's got the same number of leaves as the provinces and the communion, but also, of course, speaks to the tree of life and that lovely kind of Celtic imagery as well. And some of you will remember, there's the brown grass. Here we are on the Lambeth Day in the middle of the communion of the Lambeth Conference, bakingly hot. But this is when that little indigenous oak tree was first planted. It had to be planted out in the autumn when it was the right conditions for that. But the forest is a symbol and an act of hope of what we can do together to be God's church for God's world, is what Archbishop Justin said. So I will explain more about how we're seeking to kind of define and gain momentum for the forest, but it's practical, spiritual, and a symbolic response to the environmental crisis. And at a time where there is increasing despair, it's an act of Christian hope for the well-being of all humanity. I find it intensely moving, despite the heat, how many bishops and spouses came forward that day to add their soil to the planting of the tree. It felt like an intensely spiritual moment of commitment. So what are we trying to do? Well, overall, we're trying to increase Anglican tree growing and also ecosystem conservation, protection, restoration. Now, that ecosystem may be trees, but it may also be things like in the Philippines, they're looking after mangroves on the coastal areas. As I explained at the moment, in the prairie belt in the States, they've actually got 6 dioceses looking at prairie grassland conservation. And it is about deepening care for creation, that 5th mark of mission within the life of the church. But here are some of the examples, and that's what I meant when Sir Bishop Mark was saying, well, how are people living out this communion forest? It's turning into a lovely kind of umbrella, almost like a sort of the spread of a tree, to cover lots of different initiatives. So in this here, you can see examples of actual tree planting and forest planting and restoration. So up at the top, you've got those bishops in Kenya where they are doing this extraordinary work with government who've actually given them forests to protect. They go around prayer walking and watering the trees, but they're also restoring forests on church lands and on every occasion planting trees. So the Archbishop there every year plants the number of years he's turned. So 59 trees got planted, or I think 60 this year got planted. So the whole church is on the move, and they've got a vision. I mean, the country has a vision of 15 billion trees being planted, and the church is playing a huge role in that. The little one of the man in yellow, that's in Zimbabwe, where they've taken a very degraded area of church land and restoring the forest there. But also, as you can see, we've got examples where churches have gone into solar work to try and look at the carbon issues. You can see in the middle, there's a bishop with a mask on, actually handing over a efficient wood burning stove to try and reduce the cutting down of trees. We've got a lovely image there from the States of trees being part of a liturgy, as we heard from Bishop Andrew and Bishop Don, part of confirmation services and things as well. But we've also got those little girls, that's in South India, some of these were going on, but what's happened is the lessons have been learnt and gathered in, and that has galvanized and inspired new initiatives. So in those schools, the children get saplings and go out into their woodlands to replant and grow. The prairie one, you can see the mound of the grasslands. That's part of the Kansas prairie restoration. Bottom right, you've got, this is in the Amazon, and this is the indigenous peoples there, and the church has helped them with this tree nursery so that they can actually grow saplings from the indigenous trees and take those out. You've got the mangroves of the Philippines in the middle, and Bishop Graham Usher, who's the lead environment bishop in the Church of England, who grows hazel saplings in his garden and then gives them out at every confirmation. But the final one is the bottom left, which is a Franciscan from the Solomon Islands. And they've taken a different approach, but it's fascinating, which is they are trying to protect forests as a human rights issue. So they did an analysis of how logging was destroying the environment, but also impacting on the human rights of people in the Solomon Islands, and have taken that up to the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So what you can see from this is that we've got a combination of actual tree growing, forest and other ecosystem protection, conservation and restoration, and then various efforts at advocacy to protect the forests, but also other sort of side initiatives, but relating to this, which are going to protect trees and move us away from carbon fossil fuels. So it's a platform. We're not paying for these things to happen. It's a platform where people gather together, share what they've learned, and encourage one another. So it's facilitated and housed by the Anglican Alliance, but facilitated together with the Anglican Environmental Network. And we have a wonderful advisory group drawn from across the Communion. But how it's expressed is very much down to each province, each diocese, for them to develop what feels right and appropriate and inspirational in their own context. Your resources are helping to fund these two facilitators who are fabulous that we've recruited, both based in Kenya, but Nicholas working across the world and Irene focusing on Africa. My colleague, who some of you may have met when she spoke to the House of Bishops, Elizabeth Perry and Rachel Mash from the Environment Network, form the core team that takes us forward. We're also hoping next year to recruit someone for Latin America. So just to, in a nutshell, we're about connecting, equipping, and inspiring the churches across the Communion, looking at practical action, the spiritual dimension of it, and the advocacy, and building this community of encouragement, and then partnerships across the world, which are looking potentially at funding local projects. And I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. So the facilitators are reaching out. Bishop Mark, I'm really sorry if there's been a miscommunication with you, and I'll make sure that we get back to you with your with a response. But seeking to do talks and presentations, and resourcing others to present around the Communion Forest. So, for example, the Episcopal Youth Event printed their own poster for the forest and did a whole session on it as part of their youth work. What we'd love, and really happy to share through your networks if it's of interest, or you just come onto our own mailing list if you're not already there. We have regular connect, share and pray. We had a bishop from Canada who came and shared about what she was doing, getting local communities to produce saplings from local indigenous trees that were then part of the confirmation services. But we have these regular things where people can come and talk about what they're doing and help and inspire one another. And then we also do special webinars. So this one that we had on the 7th of September was about the spiritual dimension of the forest and how to bring it into our liturgical and theological work. But also, if you go to the Communion Forest website, and again, this is all the work that you have been enabling to happen. We've got the liturgy connected to the one that happened at the Lambeth Conference, but other prayers and ways of bringing the activities in. And we put them up in 4 languages to make sure that we can reach as far as possible. But quite often we also have Arabic and Kiswahili work and interpretation on our webinars, as well as the other languages. And we're trying to capture these stories. So there on the right side are just stories that we're hearing from around the communion. And as you can see there with Rwanda, it's kind of crossing over and gathering places where there might actually be divides in other parts. So I think it has a real sort of story of hope about Anglicans doing things together. So series of newsletters and social media posts. So we're just trying to kind of build this community online and provide as much connection as we can. That's Canon Kofi, who is the General Secretary of the Council of Anglican Provinces in Africa, and they're also very committed and engaged in this work. Just a couple of updates on what we're doing. So we're trying to make sure we can capture and help dioceses and local churches to actually look at the difference they're making. This is a real-time mapping through satellite imagery. And so any church or diocese can come in and mark out the land that they want to include in the communion forest. You can look backwards in time over, I think, 15 years. And that was very salutary when we were with the church in Congo, looking at how the forest had retreated with logging. But then, of course, over time, you can then get these snapshots of how the growing is going and how it's impacting on the environment. But this partnership we have with Restore also includes, they have a lot of scientific data about, what are the right trees to plant, what else is happening in the ecosystem. And so with them, we're developing a communion forest portfolio so that we'll be able to drop in and see what's going on around the communion and what impact is that having. And also to speak to the question you just asked, we've been working hard. It's been very technical, but we're now trying to see how we can link the communion forest to churches that are on a net zero pathway. And obviously, the first thing is what people are doing to reduce their own emissions, but there will be a kind of rump of emissions that can't be reduced. And so how do we then offset those through a properly proven carbon sequestration initiative? So we've teamed up with climate stewards who've got a lot of experience in this, and have actually been working with the Episcopal Church and the Episcopal Church in the Philippines, US and Philippines, in carbon offset programs. And so it's well documented and can be quantified in terms of what carbon sinking is happening. If you're interested, next week we've got this webinar, but we can also catch up with you later if this is too short notice. But a webinar to look at those who are looking to offset, and then how we can help to do a partnership then with those churches, dioceses in subtropical, tropical areas who are actually seeking to do some tree growing. So happy to take more questions on that in a minute. But in a word, is it working? We're just stunned with the practical projects underway, the spiritual ideas, particularly what we're learning from Indigenous communities about the relationship with nature, seeing nature not to be extracted from, not to be used, but actually how do we live in relationship as part of creation. The advocacy work that's picking up, the Franciscans in the Solomon Islands are front runners in that, but others are starting to look at what it means to talk about biodiversity. And the communion forest is giving us credibility at the UN, alongside the climate COP processes, the summits are biodiversity summits. And so this gives us a very clear voice into that. And about connection, how we can be involved. The CSP is the Connect, Share, Pray webinars. And it's helping the Anglican Communion to be known in the environmental space. So it's a sign of our commitment to that 5th mark of mission. It's still growing. We're still responding to queries and ideas that people have as they share learning. But we actually just feel very hope-filled by what's happening. We know there's huge amounts of work to be done, but if people of faith can come together, and as Bishop John said, if we can do this ecumenically, if we could do it interfaith, bring together that 85–90% of the world who are people of faith, this becomes very real, and just a place of encouragement. So this is what we believe in the Alliance. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. But if one is honoured, all rejoice. I always put this photo here because it's a lovely community in Myanmar, which I visited just before the coup. And it fills me with sorrow, but also we're still in touch with this community. And that's what it's about, being together through the hard times and the good. So thank you. So that's in a nutshell, but delighted to dig into any questions or things that you think could be helpful, things that we haven't thought about. We're only a year old, so we've got a lot of growing to do.
I have a question.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I feel that the dialogue with the Indigenous communities, in particular, each of our own local Indigenous communities, would be so important. The communities in Vancouver are different than the ones in Ontario and the ones in Quebec. And I think it'd be very interesting for us to know how other provinces in the Communion have been working alongside and in dialogue with their own Indigenous communities.
Thank you, Mary. I mean, you're so right that it is very context specific, but I think we've been very inspired just before. I think just as the pandemic took off, the sort of 4 clusters of Indigenous Anglicans put together these videos called the Prophetic Indigenous Voices into the Climate Crisis. I don't know whether you had a chance to see that, but they are very moving, and they came out of Aotearoa New Zealand Polynesia, so the Maori and Polynesian voice. There was one that came out of Africa, led at that point by Bishop Alina from Swaziland, who sadly died of COVID, but she was a marvelous voice into that. And then from Canada, and also from Brazil. And Archbishop Marinez, who I know Canada has a very close relationship there. So we were profoundly moved and inspired and done all we can to kind of leverage those insights and really the deep theological reflections in it. So when I was talking about the kind of the mindset change from an extractive idea about nature to a relational one, that is the heart of those videos. We are working with PWRDF on this. Our theologian from the Anglican Alliance is called Paulo Oeti, based in Brazil, but he came up to the Sacred Circle and was very honoured and fascinated and moved to be part of that. And I think because of that engagement, he's actually was then invited onto the Maori equivalent that has just met this last week in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so with PWRDF, there is a dialogue being fostered, which will be linking parts of Canada, I'm not exactly sure which parts, but with the Diocese of the Amazon, to really hear from the voices of the Indigenous people, Anglicans within that context, and with Archbishop Marinez's support. So I think for us, it's entirely a listening exercise. It's not bringing any answers to this at all. It's actually about how do we really humbly come into the spaces that they would allow us to come into and want us to come in to really listen and learn. And Paulo this morning was giving us a fascinating feedback just on ideas of leadership and how it's not about one person out front or from behind, but actually the gathering, the whole. I mean, these are things you'll know much more than I do from my context here. So I think it's a commitment there, but because many of these peoples live in places where forests are endangered, where they themselves may be endangered as forest protectors, that's an element of advocacy that we want to look at really closely. And an area of theology to understand and listen in and lean into what we can learn from that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Bishop John.
Thanks, Rachel. So two things, they're sort of related, but so first of all, I was in the Philippines about a year ago and planted a tree there. There were a number of us who did, which was great, but they've worked really hard at creating that sense of a carbon offset through planting of trees. They're working a lot with the Diocese of Olympia, which is essentially the diocese just south of us in the States. And so I just would like to know a little bit more about that in terms of carbon offsets related to planting in other parts of the world. And the second part of a question would be, so we're also working with an indigenous group really local to us around land conservancy, and I'm just kind of curious if that's something that you're also looking at. I think that sort of came up on one of the slides, but I'd be really interested in that because that to me is also a really exciting piece for us here in Canada around reconciliation, but also obviously conserving land and possibilities related to that. So anyway, I know I'm not sure how related those two things are, but I'll let you answer as best you can. Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. So yeah, we're looking very closely at the Philippines example. I hadn't known about Olympia. I knew that Episcopal Relief and Development and some of the US dioceses were involved in that as well. This has been very, very well researched and monitored, and so climate stewards who we're working with have been a partner in that work. So I think it has enormous potential. What we're doing is starting with 5 pilot projects where we'll link, it may be through a companion link. So for example, Bath and Wells in the UK have a partnership with Zambia. So that's a very obvious link. If there's interest in Canada and if the diocese is joining, we'd be delighted to do so. But we're just looking at some initial small pilot projects where over time the diocese with the carbon offset commitments are looking for opportunities that we can do that actually within the communion family, but make sure that they are really well researched and authenticated so that you can say with great confidence this is the amount of tonnage that you've offset. So if you'd like, or any of your colleagues would like to hear more, do come and I'll send around that invite for the 12th October webinar, but can meet afterwards if that's not convenient, for sure. So that's first thing. Second thing, absolutely, although it's called the Communion Forest, and that's where the vision really started, and it is, you know, forestry and particularly its impact on carbon sink is really important, but not everywhere in the world has forests, or that's not the issue. And so that's why, for example, Kansas started with the prairie, the grasslands conservation, restoration, and in the UK we have a wetlands project in the East Coast. So different things are happening in different places, but so the ecosystem will be just depending. The Caribbean may start on some coastal. We may even get into sort of trying to learn a bit more about coral reef restoration, because that's so significant for them and for the Pacific Islanders to protect them from storms and so on. So it's a broad umbrella, and essentially we are just the platform. So as people begin to cluster around particular issues, we can then connect them with others in other parts of the communion, and also with technical partners. You know, we wouldn't pretend to have within the Anglican Alliance or the Environment Network all the answers, but we've got a lot of contacts. And so World Wildlife Fund, for example, have got a big initiative going on and very keen to have faith partnerships. And so they've offered us the opportunity, which we're still working on at the moment, to have technical partnerships at country level around the communion. So love to hear more about the what's happening with the land conservation. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah, it's still really in early stages, but it's really exciting. Anyway, there's a number of people involved, but it would be, if it all comes together, it would be quite significant. So we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I think, you know, what we always say as well is that very often the technical advice is right there. You know, it might be in somebody's environment or, you know, National Forestry Department, whatever. So I think we'd always try to point people to government or secular expertise to help make sure it's the right tree or whatever at the right time, right place.
I think this sounds wonderful. And I think it really is as hope-filled as you're saying, because to hear about activities happening in other parts of the world, to see how dioceses can partner together to encourage that, to learn how you can do things with very little money by partnering and by encouraging people forward. It makes me realize how much of what the project I'm working on has followed that same model and may have been inspired in much of its approach by what you've done and led.
Well, I'm sure it's been mutual actually, because we are picking up, and I want to kind of really emphasize that there was already significant work going on around the communion. I hope, the thing I really hope is that you feel really encouraged by what Campus Rose Canada has achieved. I mean, it's just, because you saw the potential, said, yeah, we'll get behind that. We were so new, we had no idea where it would go. And that's just thrilling that you have done that. I just want to say hello to my friend Bruce.
Hi there. Good to getting there. Sorry.
And you'll be thrilled to hear, Bruce, that we're becoming members of the ACT Alliance. So Simon will be in my inbox daily from here on.
I think I heard that from him, actually. Yes.
So I hope we might be able to encourage them to get into this as well.
Yeah, but they've got a few other irons in the fire, I might say.
They do indeed, yeah. And I think because this is actually about denominational work and about our liturgy, our way of praying and being and expressing our faith, it actually is very appropriate for denominations. And so I very much heard what you were saying, and we are in discussion with the Roman Catholics as well to see whether this is something that they would like. They're already doing it, but can we do it together and more effectively and joined up?
I know ACT Alliance has been getting together with the Roman Catholics on various things.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, one of the developments that's happening here that hasn't yet been announced is the Green Churches Network grows out of the Catholic Church here in Canada. And Zero Emission Churches is becoming, for them, a department of Green Churches, so that we can bring it to all of the Catholic dioceses. And we become a partner for Green Churches to bring their resources to our 9 Anglican dioceses and the Lutheran Synod that are involved. So
it's
really very exciting.
Good to hear. And I think learning about, I'll look up online about the Green Churches Network. We have something equivalent here called Eco Church, where people can come in and get, bronze and gold Eco Church status. And we're having big discussions with them as well. So much of it is work that happens in context, because it must, that's drawing on your own partnerships and opportunities. But the thrill is that those lessons may be really valuable and encouraging to somebody somewhere else. And so would love, you to, and I'll talk to Archbishop Linda as well, and just see whether there's whether we could have a formal link with somebody within the Church of Canada who then becomes the kind of focal point to get the information out through the church. But do let me know if any of you want to get involved in the pilot for this carbon sequestration work.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rachel, you're always so wonderful in being able to share the good news of what's happening around the world, that also lights some passion in our part of the communion to say we've got work to do, and look at the benefits of that work as you're saying, the agents of recreation. Just a funny little moment at one of our House of Bishops meetings when the communion forest was being talked about, and one of the bishops from the Arctic stood up and said, "Forests? we don't have forests."
Wow.
And yet that sparked a whole conversation about permafrost.
Yeah.
And the changing landscape of the far north, and what that means for Canadians in the same way that the fire season that we've had this year has been unprecedented, and a realization that things are really changing quickly, and that because of the intensity of some of the fires, especially in the US, they're also recognizing that some of the seeds are actually being so consumed that they're not regenerating. And so where we find ourselves in this new time is that we have to be real agents for planting, replanting, and starting again. It's not just going to happen.
This is really important. I mean, we've been watching with horror what's been going on in Canada and the US, but also in Southern Europe. You know, we have so and I think that's why being a global communion really matters, because I think this just what you're talking about, it needs to be another area of study, and I think we could get together with you know, sisters and brothers who are facing this in other parts of the world, Australia as well, to actually see, well, how does the church speak hope and act hope into this devastation? Yeah. So I'd love to pick that up, if we might, perhaps in the new year, and look at a conference. You know, we could have a webinar between those national churches dealing with this.
That would be wonderful. And some of us will be seeing you next week in London, and look forward to seeing you in person.
It'll be lovely. It'll be absolutely lovely. Sorry, I'm not seeing all of you, but it's wonderful to have this annual meetup. And likewise, people like David, who's not coming this year, but will be coming next year, always welcome. If you want to come to the communion office, but also anything else you want to do in the UK, just let me know. I just thank you again so much. I know in these kind of hard times, it's really sacrificial giving. So I just really want to honour that, and thank you all for your love and support and prayer.
Thank you. And may we all say from our little corner of the globe, the grace together as we close. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this call.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.